Joining us again is Ben Barber, a Milton Friedman critic, and two Friedman supporters, Johan Norberg and David Bose. First, David Bose, for you, from my Facebook page. Rob from Florida says, did Friedman see any role for government in our lives?
Sure. Friedman saw a big role for government to protect people's life, liberty, and property, to protect us from threats abroad, national defense, to protect us from rape and robbery and fraud and murder. So we need police, we need courts, but beyond that, not much.
From the audience, young lady.
I have a question to ask you. I was wondering what happens...
You, which you? Me? Him?
Him.
This one.
Professor Barber.
The one in the tan suit. I wanted to ask you, what happens if my neighbors want me to water their plants for an hour, and it takes me an hour to do it? They're not going to want to pay me $10 to do such a simple job.
So they won't hire her because they don't want to pay minimum wage, but shouldn't she have a right to have a job as a 13-year-old?
I'd be perfectly willing to do it for half that, and they want me to do it for half that, so why should we be forced to pay something that we don't want to?
Well, that's lovely, but I imagine there's some 13-year-olds, and I know some right here in New York City, who might find themselves in desperate need of a job. I don't know whether you actually need a job to live or you'd like to have a job to have some extra dough, but for those who have to have a job to live and find that they are going to be paid a lot less than minimum wage because folks like you, young people like you say, oh, I'll work for less, could create an unjust society. Works for you doesn't work for justice, and what we need is a just society, not just a society where individuals can have their choices.
But there are lots of people, the people that you're talking about, who would also be perfectly willing to take a job for less money because the people are not willing to give them a job for more money.
Yeah, but perfectly willing, I'm perfectly willing to turn over my wallet when a guy points to my head and says, give it to me, but that doesn't mean I'm free when I do it.
But that's not what they're doing.
But there's no force here.
There's
Johan?
no force. They both want to.
All right, hang on.
I think that Milton Friedman would
talk.
have said, well, two things. That first of all, it's very strange for having a third person second-guess the two parties to the deal here. But second of all, he would have said that this is really counterproductive, because if you introduce a minimum wage, it means that anyone who, for any sort of reason, is deemed to be less productive than this minimum wage, perhaps because they don't have the same skill, the same experience, perhaps they don't know the English language as well as others, they will be out of a job, because the government steps in and say, no, you can't hire this guy for that. And that's a problem, because low wages are often the stepping stones to higher wages, because you get the experience.
When I last looked, minimum wage was minimum wage. Very low, very little. It is a stepping stone to a $20, $30, $50 an hour job. But minimum wage is minimum, so that if you make less, you can't live on it.
And still, by the millions, people come here to get those kinds of jobs.
Minimum wage jobs, yeah.
Let's go to the next questioner.
When you hear Professor Barber or some of the other critics speaking, to what extent do you think their issue is really with free market capitalism, or is the issue a lot of times with more of kind of crony capitalism or corporatism?
Well, I certainly think that's right. One of the problems is we don't get very many ideal types in the world. Certainly when I criticize the Soviet Union, there are going to be socialists who say, well, that's not real socialism. So it doesn't disprove socialism. Well, I think it comes pretty close, and it demonstrates the actual problems with socialism. Ben is probably saying what we have in actually existing capitalism in the United States is close enough to Milton Friedman's free market model that he can criticize it. I think that's not right. I think a lot of the problems with American capitalism are precisely that it is a crony system, a connection between big business and big government, a heavily regulated capitalism. Those are the reasons I see for the flaws that we can identify in capitalism. One of the problems is in social science we don't get to run controlled experiments. Where we have run some semi-controlled experiments are East and West Germany. Same people, same history, same culture, same language. We put a wall down the middle of the country and we tried sort of socialism and sort of capitalism, and it looks like capitalism was better. Similarly, not quite as close, Soviet Union versus the United States, China versus Hong Kong and Taiwan. And it seems to me in every case, the more capitalist country was more successful, and people tried to escape from the less capitalist country to the more capitalist country.
Yes, sir.
What do you say to people who claim that our recent economic issues are due to excessive deregulation?
Well, I think that our recent economic problems, and Johan wrote the book on this, it's called Financial Fiasco, our problems are due first to the Federal Reserve, a central bank pumping the economy full of cheap, unbacked dollars. Second, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac creating a near monopoly on financing for mortgages and doing it in a way that caused people to take mortgages they weren't going to be able to afford. Government regulations by Andrew Cuomo and a few other people in Washington that caused more mortgages, more loans to be given to people who wouldn't be able to pay. There wasn't that much deregulation. I think it was the central bank and the housing regulations that caused this crisis.
Other side, just real quick. Other side is in a Democratic administration. Republicans and Democrats share the blame. They started deregulating the financial industry. They allowed commercial banks and investment banks to be blurred into one, and that created a lot of the problems of the derivative markets, which are utterly unregulated today, and that led in part to the large collapse. So part of it is definitely deregulation.
But of course, the most important thing is if they fail, they pay the price. They bear the costs.
Let them fail.
And that's not what's going on in the financial markets. In so many ways, we're bailing them out. We're giving them new sources of liquidity every time they make a mistake.
I know you have more questions, but we are sadly out of time. When we come back, the secret to prosperity around the world.